So has anyone here ever leased a car? Okay, at some point in your future you may lease a car. You may have various options like that, and what we're going to talk about today is leasing as a source of financing and why healthcare organizations lease. Now, the first thing to know is that there are a lot of leasing companies out there. In addition to all the major banks that tend to have leasing divisions and specialize in healthcare, there are a lot of niche leasing companies as well. For example, here's one, the Zuma Capital Corporation, and they specialize in medical practices and health networks. So they give you all the benefits of leasing and why you should go to their corporation. Another one is there are a lot of different leasing companies out there, and they tend to specialize. Some will specialize in types of equipment, like diagnostic radiology or cancer treatment equipment. Others will specialize in type of organization. So there are leasing companies that specialize in smaller group medical practices, for example. So the basic question we're going to answer today, and again I start off every talk with this, which is the case that you will solve next week, is should Seattle Cancer Center lease or buy a Gamma Knife? So it's a question. There's no gray shades of gray here. It's a black or white decision. Yes, we're going to lease. No, we're not going to lease. Yes, we're going to buy. No, we're not going to buy. It's a very straightforward question. Now again, in line with my policy of trying to tell you up front how much this you'll see in the real world. The reality is in the real world, leasing is very complicated. We're going to talk about two types of leases, financial and operating leases, and they're nice, clean categories. In the real world, there's everything in between those two different kinds of categories. And some leasing documents will actually be longer than debt instruments, and all the different caveats and different options that are available. There are courses in business schools that deal with nothing but leasing. So what we're going to talk about today is a very high-level overview of leasing, and the basic principles and concepts are the same. The mathematics are what you will see in general, but just keep in mind, in reality, the real world, the complexity of the leases will be much higher than what we're going to talk about today, and therefore the calculations tend to be much more complicated than what we're going to go through today. So, what is it? Essentially, healthcare organizations are large users of leasing as a financing method. And the typical reason why is because they tend to be capital intensive. Hospitals have got lots of equipment in them, and that is the kind of thing that leases tend to be used for. So healthcare, we would probably pay more attention to leasing as a source of capital than we would in a less capital intensive industry like home health, for example. So there are three different kinds of leases, general types of leases we're going to talk about here. And one is an operating lease, and the second is financial leases, and then the third is sort of a mixture between the two. So operating leases are short term. So what does that mean? It means that they generally do not cover the time of period that is required to amortize the asset. So a car may last 6 years. Typically an operating lease will be for 2 or 3 years. So the car has not been fully depreciated yet. They're normally cancelable, which means that after a certain period of time, you can call up the leasing company and say, you know, that new Honda I just leased, take it back, I don't want it. And finally, maintenance is usually included. And that would be routine maintenance that the leasing company would provide to the organization that's leased the asset. And again, we're going to use two different kinds of terms here. One is lessee and one is lessor. Lessee will be you folks as managers. Your hospitals, your health systems, your group practices will be the lessee, and the lessor is the leasing company that you will get the lease from. So financial leases are very different from operating leases. Typically, they are long-term, so that the length of the financial lease is usually enough to recover the full depreciable basis of the asset. So the financial lease and the economic life, the tax life of the asset are usually the same. They are normally non-cancelable, so they don't allow you to phone up and say, take the asset away. And finally, maintenance is usually not included. So financial leases and loans are very similar. Financial leases and operating leases are very different. And sale and leaseback is a special type of financial lease where you take assets that you already own and lease them back to a leasing company. We're not going to talk about that very much. So what drives the leasing business and why healthcare organizations are such large users of leases are tax effects. Because typically, what are the tax benefits to UNC or Duke from buying an MRI?
Depreciation.
Depreciation is a tax-deductible expense. What about UNC and Duke?
Since they're non-profit, they don't.
Yeah, they don't pay taxes. So to a not-for-profit healthcare provider, the tax benefits from depreciation that we're already mentioning are not available because they don't pay taxes. However, ABC Leasing Company is a for-profit corporation. They do have tax benefits available from depreciation. So what we're going to talk about today is that a large amount of the benefits from leasing occur because of the tax differential between a for-profit leasing company and a not-for-profit, non-tax-paying, not-for-profit organization. So the first thing the IRS does is it wants to classify leases as either guideline or non-guideline. So the guideline lease, in the guideline lease, that is a lease that meets all of the IRS requirements for it to be called a lease. That is called a guideline lease. And in that case, the entire leasing payment is tax deductible to the lessee. So if you're an investor-owned healthcare organization, you can deduct the full portion of leasing payment as a tax deduction if it's a guideline lease. If it's a non-guideline lease, then only the imputed interest payment is deductible. So why would the IRS consider, and really this is the IRS's attempt to clearly differentiate loans from leases. So why would the IRS care about whether you're leasing or you're borrowing? And it's your answer. Depreciation is the answer. What about depreciation? What could a nefarious organization do?
Well, because if a company makes a contract with high lease payments and then at the end can buy the equipment for a very low price, it would be taking advantage. It would be getting more benefit than the normal depreciation arrangement.
And you're right. You're precisely right. Where would the benefit come? It's from the very first thing you mentioned.
On paying for the lease, in the first years at a high amount.
Right. So that's the exact reason. So when you borrow and buy, you depreciate the asset according to makers or macros, right? You get 33. It's a 4-year lease. You get a 4-year asset. You get 33% the first year, 15% the second, so on. That's all prescribed under the law. If you had a nefarious person who wanted to essentially have a lease that's really a loan, you could basically get around those laws and depreciate it all in the first 2 years, and the government will lose tax revenue. So the IRS has a vested interest in making sure that loans are loans and leases are leases. So for not-for-profits, the for-profit lender, the lessor, can basically share the benefits of the tax depreciation, the tax benefits depreciation, with the not-for-profit organization. And they can do that through various ways. The tax-exempt lease is analogous to tax-exempt debt, where a leasing company can issue a tax-exempt lease, and essentially the interest rate that they can charge is less, but the interest that they do receive, the imputed interest from leasing payment, is non-taxable. So it's exactly the same argument at the tax-exempt lease as there is in tax-exempt debt. A for-profit leasing company can offer a tax-exempt lease at lower interest rates because the imputed interest is non-taxable. Or you can go to a for-profit and get a fully taxed lease, and it's probably pay about the same after-tax amount. But this is the same logic as used in tax-exempt debt. The balance sheet affects accountants, and what I'm going to tell you right now is true as of today, but it may not be true a month or two from now. For financial accounting purposes, leases are classified as either capital or operating, and if they're capital leases, which are typically financial leases, then they must be shown on the balance sheet as a liability. So investors, when they're looking at the balance sheets of a corporation that they're thinking of investing in, they can see clearly that this is a lease, this is a form of debt that this organization owes. Operating leases, however, don't have the same rules. They can be included in the footnotes. And the reason seems to be because they do not mimic debt to the same extent that financial leases do. At least that's the logic. There's been a huge debate in the accounting world for many years as to whether investors are deceived by operating leases versus financial leases. Are investors sophisticated enough to know that they've got to go to the footnotes of the balance of the financial statements to look at the disclosures of operating leases, and that has the same effect on the balance sheet as the financial leases. It's just that one's in the footnotes and one's on the balance sheet. It hasn't been resolved. However, FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, is currently considering a proposal that would capitalize all leases, that all leases would be listed as debt. This is as exciting as it gets in the accounting. People punching each other out over, no, yes. So this may change. This is the way it is right now, but these things may change in the next little while. Okay, so that's the accounting world, which I'm going to put aside because we're more interested in the financial world and how are we going to use leasing as a financing instrument. And so from a finance perspective, leasing is a source of capital. It is a substitute for debt financing. I don't really care whether it's reported in the footnotes or the financial or the balance sheet. The issue is, what are the financial effects of leasing an asset versus purchasing an asset, or borrowing and purchasing an asset? And from a finance perspective, leasing is a substitute for debt. Because leasing requires the lessee to make fixed payments. You cannot skip the leasing payment. And lessors have similar rights to lenders. Like the leasing company, you miss making your leasing payment, the leasing company has the right to come into your hospital, put the MRI machine on wheels, and take it away. They have the right to do that, the legal right to do that. They have no vested interest in doing that, but they do have the right. So leasing and debt are substitutes. If you lease, then essentially you're using up some of your debt financing capability. So we're going to go through a quick example just to show what